The Rail to Redcliffe has a long and problematic history. First mentioned in Hansard's in 1897, there has been many false starts until construction started in early 2014. In the early 80s, the Queensland Government acquired the land for a transport corridor. With increasing residential and commercial precincts occurring around the corridor, the land became a refuge for native flora and fauna. On December the 3rd, 2010, the Australian Government, the Queensland Government and Moreton Bay Regional Council signed a funding agreement giving the long-awaited green light to build a rail line between Petrie and Kippa. These contractors, designers ACOM and Oricom and Hassels, were awarded a design-construct contract to build a 12.6 kilometre rail link. The project team faced many environmental challenges in constructing the rail line within the pristine environment within the corridor. This required commitment from all parties to address the environmental challenges. An integrated team comprising representatives from the contractor, Department of Transport and Main Roads, Queensland Rail and Moreton Bay Regional Council was formed to tackle these challenges. The successful environmental outcomes would not have been achieved without the commitment and passion of the environmental team. And this is their story.
We started an unprecedented koala management program. We started 12 months before any clearing or construction. We went out and started capturing all of the koalas on the corridor and surrounds. We gave them a full vet check. We treated as necessary, and then we monitored them for up to 4 years. This was great because we were actually able to see what they were doing, where they were going for 12 months before we started any kind of construction and 12 months during operation of the rail line. We captured and tracked 503 koalas over the period of the whole monitoring program. We translocated 28 koalas, 19 of which survived, which is an excellent result. And we were able to identify the existing threats to the koala populations, and by far and away that was the wild dog predation. We lost around 50 koalas to wild dog predation in the first 12 months before any clearing or construction was undertaken, so we knew that we weren't contributing to that. As soon as we identified that, we partnered with Moreton Bay Regional Council to develop a wild dog control program, and that reduced the mortality from 50 in the first year down to 2 in the final year. Nobody likes clearing trees, but we managed to clear the entire corridor without killing or even injuring a single koala. This has never been recorded before. And it was all because of our tracking and monitoring program, where we were able to go out every single morning before they were doing any of the clearing and identify where every koala was in the proposed clearing area. We were then able to protect their tree and those around them. Whenever we did clear non-juvenile koala habitat trees, we had to provide an offset. We could have paid almost $1,000 per tree, but we chose to plant trees wherever we could. These were the only two options under legislation at the time, but we recognised from the tagging and monitoring program that there were other threatening processes and issues with the existing koala populations. So we partnered with EHP to develop the Alternative Offsets program. This allowed us to plant out our property at Lacey's Creek, which we bought specifically for this. But it also allowed us to contribute to the koala chlamydia vaccine trial, the koala retrovirus vaccine trial, and undertake the all-important connectivity monitoring program. This is where we put trail cameras, thermal cameras and data loggers at each of the bridges, underpasses and culverts that we thought koalas might be using. We're able to identify, therefore, what were the perfect features of an underpass to put not only on our own infrastructure, but for projects in the future. The Koala Management program, with its tagging and monitoring, the veterinary care, the measures during construction, the offsets and the translocation, took a population that was on a trajectory for extinction within 2 decades to now a 6% increase. We've literally turned these populations around.
So the project was mainly in a greenfield area, which meant that the vegetation clearing was a key consideration when we were coordinating the environmental management. The fauna habitat, a big part of how we planned the vegetation clearing activities. What that meant was things like engaging fauna spotter catchers to be there prior to the clearing, so doing clearances first, being there during the clearing and also being there after the clearing. They were able to capture and safely relocate fauna species in a number of circumstances, and obviously wherever possible we were able to avoid the impact immediately to breeding places like hollow trees and nests. So in addition to some of the protected fauna, we also had protected plant species that were threatened or iconic in Australia. What we did with those was, where it was possible, we relocated them. So an example is the xantharias or grass trees. When they're identified prior to clearing, so we did pre-clearing surveys to identify the location, they were excavated out in a really careful manner and then replanted essentially along drainage lines and areas adjacent to the railway line which wouldn't be impacted in the future.
When large-scale infrastructure like roads or rails go through, it can cause a barrier to form that fauna can't get across. So we put in bridges wherever we could and dedicated underpasses like this one here. But what we found from the connectivity monitoring program was animals including koalas, kangaroos, possums and reptiles were pretty happy to use our culverts as well.
Prior to the commencement of the Moreton Bay Rail Link, two cultural heritage management programs were in place. One agreement was with the Turrbal people, which was south of the North Pine River, and the other agreement being with the Gubbi Gubbi, which are north of the North Pine River. Because of the successful implementation of both of those plans, we were able to uncover things like cutting tools, and we actually found a midden on the Moreton Bay Rail. A midden is a collection of food items that the traditional owners used to eat and gather, and provided insightful information about the history of our traditional owners. Before the Moreton Bay Rail construction even commenced, we had a Wallam froglet species management program in place. That was endorsed by the Department of Environment and Heritage Protection under the Nature Conservation Act, and that guided our monitoring efforts across the rail and looking at key habitats that were affected by the rail link. Some of the enhancements we did to the Wallam froglet habitat included changing the hydrology by putting a cut-off wall in, just to represent the natural flows within the habitat. So we went back to do some dip netting just to have a look at the tadpoles that were present. We actually found Wallam froglet tadpoles, which meant we did have a successful breeding event. And these guidelines we created could be used across the state on future Wallam froglet habitat developments.
All our construction projects, you've got your water quality outcomes, but particularly when you're in a setting like this, it was really important for us to achieve really good water quality outcomes. And some of the challenges with that, when you're dealing with these estuarine areas, you've got a lot of acid sulphate soil just naturally occurring, and when you excavate that stuff, it can turn acidic and cause your heavy metal pollutants, your aluminium and iron to come out of the soils and into your water and turn it into an acidic water, which is actually toxic to wildlife. It can damage the gills of fish and cause fish kill events. So when we're dealing with construction in these environments, we're very cautious and careful about how we test that water before we discharge it. And we had a whole process of permitting enabling us to work with the construction teams, making sure that before they touched a pump, that the enviros were called out to test this sort of stuff, and we'd take water quality samples and make sure we were on track for a legal discharge and something that wasn't going to affect this, the ecosystem through this area.
Across the Moreton Bay Rail Line, there are a number of marine restoration sites, providing critical buffer zones to our waterways. We have evidently enhanced water quality and decreased sediment runoff. We've removed a large quantity of exotic weeds which were well established before we even entered the site. And we've implemented an ongoing weed management program at key areas which allow colonisation of native species. The marine ecosystems we crossed covered internationally protected Ramsar wetlands, marine parks and key fish habitat areas. These areas ultimately flow into Moreton Bay and require the utmost protection. Moreton Bay comprises one of the largest marine park networks in Australia and is home to protected dugongs, turtles and a range of fish species. Our marine rehabilitation and offset areas are also important for maintaining viable fish stock spawning areas and water quality for important recreational areas. By preserving, monitoring and restoring mangrove and salt marsh habitats across the rail line, we've provided a solid structure for preserving these critical ecosystems. Our offset program at Rothwell alone covers 20 hectares, and when it's complete in 4 years' time, will provide critical Wallam froglet habitat marine waterways, freshwater ecosystems, salt marsh habitat, eucalypt riparian areas and Melaleuca wetlands. We've removed a number of exotic fauna species like tilapia and carp, and we will be restocking with native species, which will enhance biodiversity within the Moreton Bay region. This is such an exciting project that myself and the team are so proud to be a part of.
We came to build a rail line, and the exponential learnings we've acquired on fauna and flora have been priceless. The passion of the teams working on the link was second to none, and the results of this project have already been distributed nationally as a benchmark for how the environment, the community and industry can coexist. For all involved, this has been a great success story, which leaves a legacy to be valued by future projects.